Good afternoon. How are you? This one's an impromptu stream because stuff's happening and I thought, hey, I'll just take a minute to try and explain stuff. Right? What's that saying? Those who can't teach and those who can't teach do YouTube videos. That's me. No, I thought it seems to be a lot, and this is something that I know a fair bit about. I'm by no means a legal expert, but I'm pretty well versed in this issue. I've pulled up my tea. I have green tea ready to go, a big thing. I'm going to need to hydrate because I think I'm seeing a lot of a lot of confusion for people who don't understand what's happening with Trump versus Twitter. It can get very confusing, and it's actually extremely interesting if you can not be a boring prick. It's fascinating just to watch him have a tantrum, but at the same time, a broken clock is right twice a day, and I think a lot of, it's pretty bipartisan at this point, the problem of tech platforms and their censorship and trying to solve a lot of these problems. It's quite funny because he raises a point. The thing that frustrates me most about Trump is that he has a way of raising a point, making a point, and somehow making that point get lost in just a pile of nonsense and rhetorical nonsense and make it look like he's having a big ass tantrum, which he isn't, right? I think that most of us who have fallen afoul of a lot of these things, if you're not in that sort of blue check in group, even if you acknowledge that, hate speech and those things are a problem, like I'll defend Twitter and defend Facebook all the time. Was yesterday, right, saying these are difficult problems to solve. But I think a lot of people don't understand what's actually keeping the internet free and how fragile that is. Okay. Now, so basically, for those that don't know, I'm just going to share a quick article, all right? I may end up reading it out because it's actually pretty cool. If you bear with me, I might read the whole thing. I wasn't going to, but let's see how we go. Let's find it first, right? No, not that one. This one is the one that I like. And yes, it's from Gizmodo. And yes, they're biased and all of this stuff. And yes, the headline is a bit sensational. But it does actually do a pretty good job of assessing it. It is kind of bullshit, right? But I'm also going to give the history and the counter view on it. So just to summarize, right, just so that you're up to speed. Now, this is biased, right? This isn't entirely what happened. But this article sits here as an example of how tribal a lot of these conversations have become, because there's very few people that are actually sitting down and looking at the merits of what people say anymore, right? The essence of what they say. I think I was talking to a friend about this the other day, where people can often have good ideas, but it's wrapped up in it's been poorly communicated, or it's and that's my frustration with a lot of these tribal wars, is that we focus so much on the point scoring that we don't actually look at the merits of the conversation and the merits of the debate. And there is merit, right? It might have come from a tantrum. It might come from, I said this yesterday about the fact that he's so outrageous and this is so tribal and so toxic means that very real issues about the internet, censorship, the role of tech companies, the fact that they're allowed to operate unfettered. They operate with under a loophole of, well, not really a loophole. It's actually a law that was designed for them, but they hide under Section 230 to get away with some pretty fucking bad shit, right? Now, so I thought that what I might do is just really show what I'd really like to see happen is that we start to get back to assuming that even bad ideas, if we develop them and explore them, right, the more you talk about it, you ask questions, you clarify, right? Maybe it's because I work in web design. I think I've had to learn to speak client, or I learned to speak because I work with users, right? And often, I think of an example, and this might seem irrelevant, but it's not, because it does come back to learning how people might articulate ideas in a sloppy way, but they might actually still have a good idea or still have valid feedback. Now, I had a client, this was a bank, and they were actually, let me switch back. I'll go back to the article. So I had a client, they were saying it looked, not to me, the old design, right? So I came into a project late in the game, and they were like, we don't like it. It looks old fashioned. They couldn't actually articulate what it was, right? And so basically the font was too heavy. All they did was change it to a light font, and they loved it. But they couldn't articulate specifically what the problem was. But all they said was how they felt. And they said, it looks old-fashioned, okay? Maybe we need to look at Trump in that light. And we need to look at people like Pauline Hanson or other people. Everybody, right? Okay? Don't just write people off as an idiot, right? Sometimes people just don't have the right words. I don't have the right words. And I know this stuff really well. I'm guaranteed to misspeak throughout this, where some sort of fucking Section 230 tech bro will come in and go, well, actually, that's not how it works. It's like, well, no, okay. Target audience is explaining this to the everyday person to pique their interest so that they go and read and gather their own thoughts and gather their own ideas on this and maybe see things in a different way. Even if I articulate it differently to how others might, which is, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I have all the answers. But what I'll do is introduce you to the concepts and the history, and if you're interested, you might go read some stuff, right? But shutting ideas down just because they're not wrapped in the package that you want them to be wrapped in, I think that's really where politics is becoming really disappointing, okay? Because one thing I know, and I was talking about stakeholder management, right, yesterday, in a different context. But one thing you know when you have to work with stakeholders or work with users or work with members of the community is that good ideas come from everywhere. And you need to be open to them, okay? And part of the problem that we've gotten to, I think, with Twitter and social media and Facebook is that we've put some pretty remarkably stupid people and everyone's stupid in something, right? I'm stupid in a lot of things, but I'm good at other things. But what we've done is we've elevated these people as these blue check fucks as experts in everything, right? I think they've appointed themselves, but whatever. But this, the flip side of listen to the experts is this idea that experts can't be wrong. And I'm not saying that this is, again, I'm walking in grey area. I know that ultimately when the chips are down, you need to listen to experts. But what I'm saying is that good ideas can come from literally everywhere. Okay, epiphanies can come from anywhere, right? If you're just consuming lots of information, gathering opposing views, and I've talked about synthesis, good policy, good politics comes from synthesis. And that's why this is related to Trump, because sometimes a lot of the good intentions, the good stuff behind his policy, right, or the good intentions, they come from somewhere, right? But he just manages to turn it out like it's the fucking diarrhea Wonka machine, right? But at the same time, like, this actually there's a valid question behind this. Okay, now I'm not sure if anyone's watching. Hopefully, do ask me questions if you want me to answer anything. So that was just a tangent that I went on. So basically, for those who don't know, Donald Trump, this is from Gizmodo, so whatever. But Donald Trump escalated his inane, frothing, and mostly one-sided feud with Twitter and other social media companies he is accused of silencing right-wing voices online to a dangerous, legally questionable new level. It's a bit outrageous because it's not really what happened. It is that I can see how they would see it that way, but I just thought this was interesting. So basically, Trump signed an executive order on Thursday afternoon that purports Could you actually just report things without fucking loaded language? Anyway, that purports to radically alter foundational principles of the modern internet, specifically by tasking the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, with investigating whether tech companies are using moderation decisions as a pretext to harass, shadow ban, and censor conservatives. Which, there's a valid point there, okay? If you're across the turf wars, you know that they're doing this. Right, this is actually something that is occurring now. And one thing that I found interesting, I watched an interview with Joe Rogan and David Pakman, and I really like David Pakman. Like, I think politically, if I was going to fall, align with anyone, it would probably be, my politics is very similar to his. But what has become abundantly clear to me is that even David Pakman, like Joe Rogan raised a couple of things, like, have you seen this thing with Project Veritas, right? Have you seen this story? Are you familiar with this story? And David's answer was, no, I'm not familiar with that story. And he didn't know, right? And that's really a side effect of the bubbles. So I can see how these bubbles are insane. And this is why we need to start talking across lines, because once you become aware of of tech platforms and how AI is sort of blanket banning, again, I've been talking about this quite a bit. Excuse me. Excuse me. How they're using their, things like hate speech and harm and those sorts of things in a quite a suspicious way to silence critical voices against sort of this woke dominant narrative, right? Critical theory, and silencing dissent. Once you start to see what's happening, it becomes abundantly clear that people are they're just not aware of it. So if you're not aware of it, then obviously you're going to deny that it exists, and that's very dangerous. So anyway, I'm just going to defend this side, which is that they see it as Trump having a tantrum, because it does. It looks like he's having a tantrum, right? But he's not. Because this has been brewing for some time. And the thing that annoys me, and I mentioned this yesterday, the thing that annoys me is that this very serious issue that needs bipartisan, multidisciplinary, collaborative efforts, right, from experts, internet experts across the board, is talking to stakeholders, all that sort of stuff, it's going to become just another fucking Trump derangement spiral, right? And this is too serious. So basically, he signed an executive order. So for those who don't know what so some people are like, calm down, what's an executive order? An executive order is something that the president can sign to instruct. It's basically a bypass. Like, normally you'd need to pass legislation. He just has the ability to. It's quite unique to America. I think a few places have it, but in America, the president can just veto legislation and put executive orders in place, right? Generally, under convention, the misuse of those executive orders is frowned upon, and so I can see why that would, technically it does bypass democratic processes, right? So what we need to do to understand this, right, let me just get my tea leaves. Let me read the tea leaves. Does it say, hang on, what do my tea leaves say? Like, the world is ending. We're all fucked. Okay. All right. Anyway, so basically, this is for me to explain things to people. Like, I'm not even going to assume that you know what an executive order is. An executive order is an instruction, a written order from the president it's a decree, right? Basically. Again, fucking, you know what? Anybody who sits there and knows these things in detail, okay, it's one thing to have expert knowledge, right, in a narrow field, and actually everyone in detail on the internet. It is another thing to explain things at a very basic level. So if I misspeak or I oversimplify, it's because I can't have a 6-hour fucking stream. And also I'm trying to make this entertaining and interesting enough that people might actually learn, okay? So he signs an executive order instructing the FCC to investigate whether tech companies are using moderation decisions as a pretext to harass, shadow ban, and censor conservatives. Now, I talked about this yesterday. I'm not 100% convinced that that's what's going on. I'm sort of convinced that the people in a certain tribe like to generally a lot more threatening in their behaviour. I would actually say that it's like, I think there's a lawsuit. I haven't read the outcome yet, but I believe that they have lost in court. They've failed to prove anti-conservative bias in court. I know that came out 2 days ago. I haven't checked, but I'm aware that they're losing. I don't think that, like, once you understand how this technology works, the evidence doesn't point to. There's another explanation. It is biased, but the explanation is more that it's more about the nature of discourse and the behaviour and the way that people conduct themselves across factions than it is about any sort of political view as such. Now, I'm a big qualifier on that, okay? Now, yeah. Okay. So Zeke1130 says Trump wants to control the press and social media soon as many. No, I don't think that's the case. That's what I'm actually going to talk about this. So I'm going to try. Well, do you know what I might do is, because I'm good at speaking client, speaking user, speaking people, right? What I'll do is I will translate. Maybe we need a Trump translator. Maybe more people need to actually like sit down and go, okay, you know, like when you've got your fucking crazy person and you go, oh, what they meant by this. Maybe we need that for Trump. So yes, it has come from a tantrum. Okay, but what's been brewing underneath this, if you're not familiar with it, right, is that this has been brewing for some time. I've been talking about this on my channel for a while now, but which is that under the guise of genuine things like hate speech, disinformation, you know, those problems that exist, is that tech companies have overreached and sort of caught a lot of MAGAs in the net. Okay. Now, this is something about where, you know, bias in tech is a thing where people don't see their own bias. So those that are developing a lot of these products, a lot of these algorithms, they just take something like hate speech as a thought terminating cliche on face value. And there's people that misuse that, right? I'm not going to talk about the fucking trans issue. I'm bored. But so this all started like sort of, it's a lot of these things start with good intentions. Okay. So what I'll do is, rather than derail, I'll go back to 1996. Let's talk about 1996. Okay. Now, the internet was very different back then. Now, the history of this is, what people might not know is this, again, the only reason I'm talking, this is an international thing. Okay. But, the reason I'm talking about American law is because these tech companies are fighting in America, right? They're based in America. They're American companies, okay? And that's one objection that I've often had with Twitter and Facebook and their overreach and rules, is that we are subjected to American ideas of decency, right? And this is something that George Carlin's battles, these fucking evangelical Christians, right? They fucked it up for everyone, and everyone else has to suffer because a few fucking American Christians are upset and can't, Helen Lovejoys of the world, right? Now, so the history of this is basically that the internet hit in the 90s, okay? Now, the landscape, so you can't actually just, there's a lot of people, I think, who have the misconception that just because you think something is true, that there's a legal argument for it. Now, the way that the law exists, right, outside of executive orders, of course, is that in order to put a legal argument or have a legal argument against anything, the law needs to exist. It needs to be established. Okay, so it needs to be an established law. So when you've got something like the internet or a new disruptive piece of technology, and you're trying to you're trying to work within an international framework, first of all. Second of all, within a framework that doesn't have laws for any of this, but you've got it. You can, so basically, this started in the 90s around defamation. Okay, so defamation online. When I first started, this is how new this is. When I first studied my undergrad degree, this was in 2000, whatever, something, and this, I remember there's a landmark case, right? I did a cyber law unit, and the laws didn't exist. Right, there were around defamation, landmark things around harassment and defamation in the early 2000s. This is how new this is, right? Now, so what happened? Okay, so let me just rule back my thoughts because I lost my brain. My brain ran off into fucking tangent town, as it usually does. But the history with this, right, was that up until 1996 or the 90s, when the internet was real, there was a number of cases, right, that created a bit of a paradox. The internet created somewhat of a paradox, right? So basically, up until 1990s, it was established that under defamation law, right, not only is the person who defamed you responsible, so it applied to sort of publications. Let's use an example. I'm trying to think of an example because I'm explaining this simply, all right? So you are a news agent, landmark case, news agent, all right? A news agent sells magazines. Now, you sell hundreds of magazines, right? And in that, there's an article that says, there's a magazine, right, that says something defamatory, right? That person sues for defamation and wins. Now, if you win in a defamation suit, traditionally, everybody who published it along the line, right, or anybody who shared that information becomes liable, right, for defamation. Now, that's one thing that you need to understand. Now, in the case of a newsagent, it's been established in law for some time that you can't possibly read every article in a magazine. You can't possibly do that. So there's been, so the idea of a business owner acting as a platform, right? They can't possibly vet everything that is in their possession that they sell. So if they sell that magazine without having read it, why should they be liable for defamation? So that's reasonable, right? So this comes out of that principle in defamation law, right? Now, so you get the internet, right? Suddenly, you've got people who are, I'm just trying to remember the fucking case. Hang on, where is it? Oh, my brain. I need to remember that my brain doesn't recall things when I've got lights on. CompuServe is what CompuServe. Who's the other one? The two big ones starting with P. Fuck. I do know this. Yeah. So hang on, let me just move on to this. So now this has started. I'm just trying to find the landmark cases because my brain just emptied itself. Where are we? It was fucking hell. Anyway, so basically two main cases in America. One of which was that, so like an ISP or telecommunications provider, or basically, if you're like an ISP or telecommunications provider, so like your mobile phone company, AT&T, those sorts of things, right? They don't editorialize, you can't, if someone defames you on their service, right, they can't possibly vet that, right? So they should not be held liable. That's one principle, right? The other principle is like in the case of, say, a magazine, right, where if you do choose to publish that information, because it goes through a series of so if you publish something, so publisher means that they actually do review the content, they have a responsibility, and they then choose to publish it, right? Versus that passive sharing, right? Passive sharing is something that became, the line. I'm not explaining this well, but you get what I'm saying. Now, so the conflict that happened with social media and online was that basically this came in conflict with the decency and communications thing. So basically, American fucking conservatives fucking it up for everyone else as usual because of their purity bullshit. But so basically, there's rules around what you put, like, just fucking decency, all of this sort of. If we actually, if we could just get rid of that shit and just say what you want, don't be a dick. I think that'd be fucking better. But anyway, it actually comes out of trying to protect the children online and trying to protect them from online porn and those sorts of things. Now, so all of that fucking stuff aside, so it was developed in response to some lawsuits, right, against ISPs in like the early 1990s, basically, right? And they had different interpretations of what whether they be treated as publishers or distributors of content. Now that line's really important because the second that you, again, in defamation, it comes down to intent, really, when you think about it. So there were two separate cases, one of which was what are they called? CompuServe, right? Where they didn't intervene in defamation. Therefore, they were not liable, right? So they obeyed the law. The more that you moderate, the more that you try to help, and the more that you try to intervene, even when it's a common sense one, like something like really violent or heinous or whatever, right? If you try to comply with basic decency laws, the more that you intervene, the more you are liable for everything that's on your platform. So it created this paradox, right? Where if someone posts something on a forum and you, let's say they post 10 things, right? 10 horrible things, and you delete 9 of those things, okay? But one stays up, okay? And someone sues over that last remaining thing. What they could argue is that you editorialize your platform. So what you do is you leaving that one up, right, is editorializing. So that's really at the core of this, right? I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but anyway, I'm working on short notice. Prodigy was the other company. Sorry, I was scrolling while we go. So Prodigy let's just read Wikipedia, shall we? So prior to the internet, case law was clear that a liability line was drawn between publishers of content and distributors of content. Publishers would be expected to have awareness of material it was publishing and thus should be held liable for any illegal content it published, while distributors would likely not be aware and thus would be immune. So that was a long-held principle of defamation law, okay? This was established in Smith versus California, where the Supreme Court ruled that putting liability on the provider, which is a bookstore in this case, that was actually the newsagent case that I was mentioning, would have a collateral effect of inhibiting the freedom of expression by making the individual more reluctant to exercise it, right? Which is good, okay? Well established. See, the internet's broken a bunch of things open. So, 90s hit, internet hits. Fucking everyone's posting everything they want, okay? Are we platform, are we publisher? Okay, now it created, so let me read. In the early 1990s, the internet became more widely adopted and created means for users to engage in forums and other user-generated content. While this helped to expand the use of the internet, it also resulted in a number of legal cases putting service providers at fault for the content generated by its users. This concern was raised by legal challenges against CompuServe and Prodigy, who were like ISPs at the time, right? CompuServe stated they would not attempt to regulate what users posted on their service, while Prodigy had employed a team of moderators to validate content. Both faced legal challenges related to content and basically created this fucking inconsistent paradox, right? Which is basically the more that you intervene, the more liable you are. So Section 230 was introduced to address that, okay? So this is in the Telecommunications Act, but it's called the Decency Act as well. So, So Section 230, as passed, has two primary parts, both listed, right? And it's the Good Samaritan portion of the law, which is very important, right? So in the case of Twitter, if they are a platform, right, then their moderation has to be operating in good faith, right? So basically what it does is it allows for them, hang on, where are we? Let me scroll down to Donald Trump because they actually literally put it in here today. How quick is Wikipedia, by the way? Here we go. Look at this. Look how quick Wikipedia is. It's good, isn't it? So United States President Donald Trump has been a major proponent of limiting the protections of technology and media companies under Section 230, right? Due to claims of an anti-conservative bias. In July 2019, Trump held a social media summit that he used to criticize how Facebook, Twitter, and Google handled conservative voices on their platform, which is a concern. I have that concern too. I'm not sure that it's. I think it's more of a result than a conspiracy, but that's just me. So during the summit, Trump warned that he would seek all regulatory and legislative solutions to protect free speech, which is a good thing, right? Because it is a battle at the moment. The problem is he's not entirely wrong, and that's what frustrates me. He just has a different way of fucking saying it. So in late May 2020, i.e. yesterday, President Donald Trump made statements that mail-in voting would lead to massive fraud in a pushback against the use of mail-in voting due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Fucking imagine reading this 10 years ago and going, what the fuck? Anyway. So, on May 28th, let's skip. On May 28th, 2020, Trump signed an executive order preventing online censorship, stating in a press conference before signing it the need for it. A small handful of social media monopolies controls a vast portion of all public and private communications in the United States, which is true and correct and worrying, okay? They've had unchecked power to censor, restrict, edit, shape, hide, alter virtually any form of communication between private citizens and large public audiences. That's absolutely true, and I agree with what he's saying, right? I don't agree with his approach, but it's an interesting conversation to have nonetheless. So the EO specifically targets 47 USC, which is Section 230C2, which is the Good Samaritan protection for media companies in their decisions to remove offensive materials in good faith. Okay, now the argument with this is that by Twitter introducing basically what Twitter did was recontextualize what Trump said. Now, I would argue that I don't think that they operated in good faith. I mean, it's pretty well established now that Twitter are very biased. What I wish would happen is that Twitter would just fucking admit they were biased and say, this is our platform, this is our rules, right? And not pretend otherwise. Okay. Now, for me, I stay on the platform because it's a benefit, but I think that it's like, I wish they would just be straight with us. I think part of the frustration for a lot of people, and for me as well, from what I've seen, is I wish they would just admit that they were biased. Then you know what you're working with. Not pretending that it's a free and open platform, which is how they built their platform, right? The free speech wing of the Free Speech Party, right? Jack Dorsey famously and naively said, right, that, and they got their user base by lying to people, right? They misled people, right, into thinking that it was even and free. I mean, however idealistic it might have been, they misrepresented and they changed the deal on us. Okay, as soon as Trump was elected, and just before that, they went and they changed the deal on people, and now we're locked into these platforms. And there is no real alternative. I mean, Gab's there, but it's just, whatever. There's no alternative. And the thing is that if we had known at the time that this was going to be the solution, would you have signed up? Right? That's the question you've got to ask. So there's a little bit of misrepresentation there. So there's a few different legal background here, but I'm just this one. Okay, that's Megan Murphy's case, which she lost, but I think there's a good argument for that. So these battles are being fought against big tech are being fought in many different ways. One of which the legal argument could be that they have, unfortunately in the terms of service of Twitter that says we may alter the terms of service anytime. And then, so that's kind of like, well, that needs a conversation about whether that's actually a legal, like that doesn't, it's, I would actually argue that that's an unconscionable contract, but we just haven't really gotten there yet with the argument. But someone will get there. They'll find an argument, right? And this Good Samaritan defense is an interesting. The Good Samaritan portion of that is really interesting to me. So now the Good Samaritan protection, right? So it means that they have to operate in good faith. So over the years, courts have interpreted that the in good faith portion, right, of the statute, that it has to be evoked. Good faith may be revoked, such as if the media companies have shown bias in how they remove material from the platform, right? The goal of the EO is to remove the Section 230 protections from such platforms, thus leaving them liable for content. That I don't agree with, right? I don't think that's really a way forward. What I see here is that there needs to be better a new law, right? The thing that upsets me is that it is a circumvention of the democratic process, which is that basically he's had a tantrum, okay? What he could have done was rally bipartisan support about some of these things and actually just make the law better, and he hasn't done that. What he's done is he's done an misused executive order to try and short circuit the due process and all of those things. That's not really good. But the essence of what he's actually doing addresses a real problem. Okay, so it's an opportunity to engage it and talk about it. Now, so anyway, So basically what happened was, going back, there's a number of different angles in which these battles are being fought, okay? And it's incredibly complex, and I know that I'm fucking the least equipped person to try and explain it because I fucking talk too many thoughts in my head at once. But basically, what we find, it's a bit of a zugzwang situation, a bit of a, zugzwang move by Twitter. Right, there's no real winning moves here because in the platform versus publisher debate, right, and I'm using platform and publisher as short circuits for the legal definitions between Section 230C1 and 230C2, which are service provider and the content provider. So let's just, for the sake of simple language, just say publisher versus platform. If you're a platform, you provide a platform and you don't get involved in the content, you can intervene if it is under certain criteria. Like with this one, it was, even as a platform, you can still moderate, right? This is moderation. But if you are a publisher, it means that you're editorializing. So by suggesting that Trump's tweets now, where Twitter fell down was that they tried to fact check a tweet that was an opinion. And what they did was they shared articles from publications that basically just hate Trump. They're actually just, I think, is there anybody here, like, if you still think that CNN, they're telling, like, that there's not a grain of truth to what Trump is saying about the way that they behave, right? Like, I was watching a thing this morning with a Democratic strategist who's basically like, oh, the reason he says it's fake news is because, no, it basically just deflected the criticism from CNN that they're not don't have complete Trump derangement syndrome. They do. It's just so hard to know what's true anymore. I've seen the lies that they tell, right? That's the thing that makes me sad, is that once great media institutions just can't be trusted, and I don't trust any of them. Anyway, waffling. But so it's being fought in a few different places. But one of them is, there's a few different debates, and I think they seem to keep getting crossover, which is whether, like, the economic entity itself, so whether it's a utility versus a private company, and whether a private company can have too much power. That comes under antitrust legislation and those various other things, right? Then you've got Section 230, which is incredibly significant, incredibly important, and I think it's something that really should be upheld wherever possible. Now, what's interesting about this is that Trump is arguing that they're not operating in good faith, which I would actually argue is true, right? I believe that there's a cult that's taken over this fucking thing, and they're not rational, and they're biased, right? I think that if you can't see that bias, then you are clearly either not paying attention or you benefit from it, right? It's yeah, anyway. So now there's a lot of different, and also the arguments around, so there's the antitrust aspect, the fact that they are platform versus publisher, there's data retention and privacy, so there's things about Privacy Act. Now, the thing that allows these companies to exist as they do hinges on these 26 words in Section 230, basically, because it's not just about whether you are liable in defamation. Now, the way that law works, right, is that law, I'm pretty sure that this is very, very high school level, but there is binding and non-binding precedent. So law operates on precedent, right? As I said before, you can only rule, like a judge, especially in the Supreme Court. That's why they can only interpret the Constitution, because they're mandated to only interpret the Constitution, right? Same thing, like judges are only mandated to interpret the law, okay, and form judgments and arbitrate, something like that. Brain not working. But arbitrate on the meaning of the law. They can't question the law. They interpret the law. And that's the difference, right? And I think that's another part of the reason why I think critical theory is so dangerous, is because they question everything about, yeah. And that's one of the main arguments for critical theory, is that all of the law is something that has to be interpreted rather than, you can't just... Activist judges are generally frowned upon up until recently, where they can only interpret the law. They can't write the law. The only people that can write the law are people in Congress, right? That's the only people. That's the only way laws can get passed. The other way is via policy and delegated legislation, but that is delegated through those authorities. So the way government works, am I explaining this like to a 6-year-old? Probably not. But the way that laws are passed, right? That's one thing I think. Well, Twitter, for one. It astonishes me how many journalists don't actually fucking understand how laws get made. Like, that's astonishing to me, right? Yeah, that's great. Okay. So how laws get made is that people don't understand is that the only way to make law, simply speaking, right, is to pass legislation, okay? Now, how checks and balances work is that the judiciary exists to interpret and apply that law or have it tested. So the history of common law is to read the law as it stands, interpret it, and solve those disputes, okay? Now, and the executive orders are just sort of a way to stop that tyranny, right? To stop that stuff going bad. Going bad. Highly intellectual argument there, Taya. So basically, yeah. But what stands there is that we can only interpret tech law within law that already exists without passing legislation. Now, the problem with this is that the US is so heavily polarized, and politicians are so fucking epically retarded when it comes to communications policy in general, that there's a massive gap here. So the one way that you start to get law to evolve or make law or whatever is through decisions, right? And that's what precedent is. When you argue a legal case, you need a precedent. You need to argue your case, right? So otherwise, yeah. So Section 230 is a piece of legislation because the law didn't have, the law turned out to be absurd, right? Now, again, this is a new battle that we're going to fight now, because what we have assumed is that tech companies are operating in good faith, right? Now, are they operating in good faith? I would say that Jack is operating in the same bubble that people like David Pakman are, and people like that, which is that they just don't understand. They don't know what they don't know. I don't think that they're doing anything. They're not sitting there going, wah, I don't think that that's the case. But the bubbles are so intense, and this, dare I say, this cult does like to control what you can and can't read, that a lot of the people are in it that are working at tech companies and aren't seeing things that, like how, even if you think it's nonsense, okay, this is something, okay. So the Project Veritas thing, yes, it's got, cuckoo shit on it. But one thing that continues to astonish me about the left, right? And I say the left to be simplistic, is their refusal to engage with materials outside of the bubble. But it's like, has anyone read The Art of War? Like, the one thing that you need to do to win against your enemy is to know them, right? And this is what astonishes me, is that these are apparently politically savvy people who haven't even seen any of the fucking material because they're whipped up into a state of frenzy thinking that Tim Pool is the gateway to the alt-right. Like, it's just fucking ridiculous. But anyway, but I do engage with this material. And look what happens to me as a result, right? Excuse me. But basically, so where Twitter's gone wrong is that I think they fell into the bubble, right? They misread it and they fucked up. They fucked up, right? Because they fact-checked something that I believe was an opinion, and also there was some evidence that, I mean, that was my first thought, and I'm not even I have no skin in the game. I'm an Australian political scientist. I don't care, but I mean, just having gone through the Australian, the gay marriage, what's the fuck? Words. Thing. The postal vote. And seeing that, several thousand, like photos of several thousand things being lost, right? Post votes are problematic, okay? There are issues of security and there are issues with that, okay? We saw it, okay? Now, this is a well-held principle, but for some reason, because Trump said it, again, it was not in the right package. So, I think if it's one of those things where if it comes from Trump, it must be bad. It's like, well, no, I think it's pretty well established that postal voting has risks attached to it and that we need to deal with security, especially the fact that there's a heavily polarized nation and there's a whole faction of people who have an any means necessary approach to this election, and that on both sides, and that concerns me. And I don't think that I think that it's a discussion. Okay, should you be fact checking someone's opinion on that? Now the argument from the left is that, well, the left. I hate saying these words, but these are the words that everyone uses. So the argument is that he has 80 million followers and he's surrounded by conspiracy theorists and all this 5G, Bill Gates stuff and all this fucking stuff, whatever, that he's kind of created a weird-ass loopy faction, which is true, right? But again, I've talked about this before. How dumb do these people think we are? And how dumb do they think people are? I don't think people are as dumb as... I think when you sit down with anybody and you present an alternative view, they will often listen, okay? But if you censor one view, this is like the Streisand effect shit. It's just like if you suppress something, people want to see it and they'll think that you wanted to suppress it for a reason. It gives it more weight than it ordinarily had. So, and again, fact-checking has a role to play, but that makes them a publisher. Okay, now I know I wandered off because I'm tired, and this is my painkiller festival where I can just ramble. But basically, the knock-on effects of that, which is that you're a publisher. Well, if you're a publisher, then what about all the other lawsuits against Google, right? Where they're selling all of the ads and gobbling up media. We've just had mass layoffs of journalists. Every newspaper, every major paper is fucking shutting down. It's been catastrophic for media worldwide, right? And Google and Facebook are at least partially to blame for it, right? And Twitter, right? So that means that they're being anti-competitive. Do they need to be broken up, right? Are they, should there be, they basically have become a monopoly. So it opens other conversations up, which are more significant than just like defamation and liability. So a lot is balancing on whether it's a platform versus a publisher. It might not be obvious, But this is something that the tech companies have held on to for a very long time, and it's actually quite sacred, and I believe in the spirit of that law. I think that is something that must be defended at all costs, right? Because that is the one thing which is that, you know, if I build a platform, or even if I accidentally retweet something, right? And you don't know that it's, what's worrying me is if I know something is false and I share it anyway, then that's a matter of intent, right? I intended to falsify. But if I retweet something that later turned out to be untrue, and then you and you in good faith tried to have that conversation, right? And I've done this a few times. Like, if I end up being wrong, right? What about this, you know, sex versus gender? What if there's a new study that shows that there is a trans gene, and we rewrite everything that we know about sex and gender, right? There's something revolutionary that that just completely changes. I defer to the scientific method on that. I think that's a great idea. Same with COVID, right? We started with certain information. We worked with the information that we had, and then information changed. It got, you know, and morphed and evolved. Like that's human. And you shouldn't be vilified for talking about something just because you're ahead of the game. Like for me, I've been 5 years ahead of my industry for fucking ever, and being suppressed for expressing myself and being right is not something that, you know, only time can tell that, right? So anyway, again, I know that's a sort of side point, but I'm just saying this is underneath this. It's not just a boring legal issue, which I know is boring, but these conversations do matter because it does come down to intent, right? And I don't believe that Twitter intend. It's going to come down to intent. They're going to have to basically prove, I think in order to uphold this, they're going to have to prove bad faith, right? Which will be interesting because it means subpoenas, right? That would be interesting because I would like to hear about subpoenas about fucking these sorts of things and whether they are actively suppressing people. And it'll be interesting to see people like Megan Murphy and other people's accounts sort of subpoenaed and called as witnesses. That would be an interesting development, right? This is going to go to the Supreme Court. This is fucking insane. But anyway, I'm not going to, so platform versus publisher, it seems boring, but it's actually got a lot of implications. So, you know, but one thing that I think Twitter fucked up with this, if I may be inarticulate, is that they chose the wrong tweet to fact check, right? And also one argument with this good faith thing that we're talking about is that by adding that single line, right, they changed the context of Trump's tweet, right? And that's what the media have been doing. So basically, I mean, I can see it from his point of view, right? Imagine that you believe CNN is a fucking trash mag, right? I don't believe it's that simple. I think that, you know, I think that they deny their bias, but I think that, you know, it's still a decent publication. Decent outlet. Individual journalists are fuckwits, but, you know, cult members, whatever, okay? What happened was that basically what the traditional media have thrived on for the last 4 years is taking a Trump tweet, or taking anyone's fucking tweet, changing the context of it, building outrage, and whipping up sort of a frenzy, right? And what they're doing is they're framing that. Now, framing is a persuasive device. It's a rhetorical device. So if you take something out of its context, right, which was, he might have been saying, this is my opinion, right, whatever, I think he's got a point. Again, shitty package. Can both things be true at once? Maybe that's the thing. But, you know, at the end of the day, Twitter has a responsibility to make sure that they are... Okay, so what they did wrong was that basically, you know, Trump is critical of CNN and MSNBC and all those sorts of like mainstream outlets to begin with. So what they did was they took his tweet from his point of view. I'm trying to understand. Okay, let's just walk through this. If we speak Trump, let's put it, let's say I write something, a matter of opinion, right? And Breitbart have decided to basically run hit pieces on me for the last 4 years, okay? And they bully me, and everything that I say is twisted. Everything I say, I can't win. And, it's just basically just constant defamation of character or misrepresentation of what I've said, right? Now, I think the case could be made that CNN and Trump have that fucked up dynamic going on between them, okay? Now, imagine if then you write a tweet as Trump, right, that then redirects to the opinion of the very people that you've been fighting and who have been basically bullying you. And then they redirect you and say, look, this is the real opinion. Look at this crazy person, right? Look at it through the lens of bullying. That's framing. That's a framing tactic. That's editorializing. So again, when it comes to Twitter, I don't think we can attach intent, right? You can't attach intent to a fucking massive company that's got several thousand employees, right? They're tens of thousands of employees. What you can do is say, oh, fuck, let's look at how the blind spots here, right? The blind spots. What are the blind spots? And the problem with Jack is that he's fucking in the bubble, okay? I don't know if he is aware that he doesn't know what he doesn't know. He doesn't know that his own... I don't know if he does, actually. His own organisation has been infiltrated by fucking Antifa fucks, right? And people like that, and people who just aren't operating in good faith. And I would argue that, the company is probably operating in good faith, but the people in it might not be. So that's going to be interesting, because they're going to have to prove bad faith, which means they're going to have to subpoena internal stuff. So I can't wait to see it. It'd be interesting to see if this goes away, whether it's made public or not. But again, if they defend themselves as a platform, they have to not do this stuff. Okay, they also have to let everyone back. So they have to let Megan Murphy back. They have to let Alex Jones back. They have to let people back on their platform. So if you're a platform, you can't have use terms of service outside of they hate speech. The fact that they're saying they're a platform and have those the terms of service as they are, I would argue that they are a publisher just by enforcing any of those, right? There's an argument to be had that it fits within some of the Section 230, but again, this is sticky. But the second that Twitter and Facebook enter into admitting that they're publishers, right, it means they're subjected to not just defamation law, but antitrust, right? Privacy, there's so many other things that they become subjected to, right? So this is the coalface. This is going to be the landmark case. Now, I do know there's cases in Australia at the moment where the ACCC are suing Google and Facebook under antitrust because they would argue that they have an unreasonable amount of market share and are exploiting that, and that basically they're suing them to make sure that they pay news outlets for posting their stuff. Now, Q just quoted, Donald Trump needs to focus on what's important. Well, I actually think that this is important. Okay, that's the problem. The problem is that this is an extremely important issue, and it's an extremely complex issue, and fucking hell, it shouldn't be... It's actually so important that he should not touch it. No, it's Q. Q said there's a riot happening in one of the best cities in America and he's worried about Twitter. Well, yeah, there's something to be said for that, but this isn't that. There's a legitimate issue here. This is actually something that anyone who works in the internet field has been concerned about for some time, and Section 230 is a legitimate fight. And if you've been watching since the beginning, I did actually say that sometimes, good ideas are wrapped up in a shitty package, and I'm really hoping that this FCC inquiry doesn't become doesn't crash and burn just because Trump said it, right? There's lots of things that have done because, Section 230 has been amended and evoked for, in the case of sex trafficking, for example, and that's helped to address that because a lot of the online porn arguments are around freedom of speech, that pornography is freedom of speech. But under this, right, it's called, fucking, my brain's not working. What's it called? Starts with F. Brain not work. The acronym, whatever. Can't remember everything at once. Foster and Sester. Sorry, I do know these things. It's just when the camera's running, it gets a bit tricky to remember everything. But, those are valid complaints, which is that you can't use this stuff to justify everything. Okay, so, and this is emerging law. It is important, and I think that one thing that I also want to suggest to you guys is that you can care about two things at once. They're both important. Okay, like it's okay to care about multiple issues at once and stop policing what someone's talking about on any given day. Like, that's like me saying I choose to tweet about this issue, knowing that there's riots and the heinous things that are going on in the United States at the moment. And honestly, the reason why I choose not to participate in them is because anything that I write about it would just be nothing, right? It would just be virtue signaling. Well, of course, like, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy, and my heart breaks. It doesn't mean that I'm going to, I don't need to write that, right? I don't like this grief porn shit either. But one thing I can do is talk about this with my friends and sort of pique their interest in it. And also just because I thought that it was... What's funny is I'm always more organised in my head than it turns out to be on the live stream. But it's really important to understand that, with great power comes great responsibility, right? It's a really weird, interesting problem. But with a lot of these freedoms comes a fuck ton of liability on the flip side, okay? So I'm interested in the platforms and what they do and how we can move forward with that. And one is not more important than the other. And that's the problem with being president, is that he can only care about one thing. Honestly, it's pretty funny that he's struck on a very important issue in the middle of a toddler tantrum, right? But it's just, yeah. I think, honestly, I have to reluctantly. I'm on the fence about Trump. I don't think that he is as fucking. I don't think the sky is falling, but I also don't think it's ideal. But that's me. I'm a big fan of. I think people who say that they don't want politicians as leaders, and I say, well, politicians have a legitimate skill set around peacemaking, and I mean Barack Obama was not. He was he's a politician, and politicians have to be able to mend wounds, not create division, and deal with stakeholders and tolerate people who disagree with you and engage others. And, there's a real skill set in persuasion, election, policy making, those sorts of things that make a good president. And a lot of the reason why we got here, America in particular, not so much here, is the celebritization of politics. Like it's fucking personality driven bullshit. I don't like it, but that's normal for America. You guys it's a big business. Elections are big money. It's not something that we necessarily do, but you do you. And what I love about America, as much as I sort of critique some of the American cultural things that bleed into everyone else, you guys fight the fights that, you fight the good fights sometimes, and you have those big out loud discussions, and this one's a big one. And the fact that Twitter and Facebook are headquartered there means that they can't escape it. They can't ignore it. So it's interesting. But, yeah, I just want to see... you know what? I want Twitter to fucking admit it. That's all I want. I want them to admit it. I want them, and I want there to be a viable alternative, right, that's funded. And they say, no, we only want woke voices on here. This is a bubble, okay? If you say X, Y, Z, you can't use our platform. And then the market decides. The market goes, fine, we'll go and build our own, or we'll go on Gab. Okay? Thank you very much for your information. Now I know what the deal is. I don't like the disingenuous idea that they're not admitting the problem. Okay? It's obviously a problem. They have to know. Megan Murphy sued Twitter, right? They have to be aware of this problem by now. I still think they're trying. I'm noticing that the algorithm is behaving itself a little bit better. And like I've said, machine learning is still, 5 years away from being even remotely reliable. So I think giving them a little bit of room and leeway to, test kinks in the machine. But this one's, I mean, the fact that how did they not see this one coming? Picking a fight with the president, how did they not know that this would happen? Right? It's like, fucking hell, you could introduce that feature slowly and then you don't just put it on. Oh, fuck. Who's running Twitter? If they need a new CEO, I reckon I could do it, because he's clearly not able to. He's sitting in this fucking bubble where it's just bad business. Who is it? Who's the lead of their design team? Like, this is stakeholder management 101. This is audience engagement 101. This is measurement and data. Like, how the fuck? Like, they should be measuring false positives for a start. Like, why the fuck? How is Twitter dropping the ball with this? It's everything I know about design thinking. It's clearly driven by ideology, or like complete ideology that has created a bubble of absolute ignorance to the point where they just can't see what's in front of them, right? There is bias, right? Again, the reasons why for that bias, I think a lot of it is linked to behavior. As I've said, as someone who sits in the middle of both, I get harassed by MAGAs and harassed by wokes all the time. And the MAGAs are a lot more aggressive, right? And a lot more violent, and it's a lot more gendered, and it's a very abusive, like it's sort of 3 tweets to rape and death threats, right? Wokes will just block you and fucking report you or whatever, but most of the time. But people on the right will they will harass you, right? And call you, like, they will dogpile and all of those sorts of things. So it's probably it's a different behavior. And so when you put the algorithm in place to detect a certain aggressive behavior, and one side engages in that certain aggressive behavior and the other one doesn't, because they've they sort of know how to play nice and know how to look nice and know how to use code words and all that sort of stuff to sort of evade, and they've also got friends at Twitter, right? That's how it happens. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's the nature of design. Yeah. I got to disagree. I'm harassed daily by communists. Well, I would argue that, is that Antifa that you're talking about? Because I would argue that those kids that harass, they're not communists. They're just they're actually just bullies. They're like, yeah. Sec 1971, nice MAGA here, sorry for the poor experience. That's okay. I take people on face value. I don't judge people. One thing that I want to do with the new podcast, right, is try to debubble. Like, it seems like an impossible feat. Like, if I have XYZ on my podcast, the other side won't come on. Or I don't want to go alongside that person. So no, I just want to have a conversation with you. And this guilt by association bullshit. I don't care about, I've grown up with people that I disagree with, right? My family are One Nation voters and all that stuff. And I learned very early, as a political science graduate and on the left, I learned to just not speak about stuff and just let stuff go, and realize that, I'd prefer to have just let it go. And still, that people aren't evil just because they disagree from you. And also, I have to concede, not MAGAs, because I think that there's a particularly vile faction there that just really are just, unfortunately, everyone else gets caught up in this. But there's vile on the left and vile on the right, and everyone else who's normal, right? The 80% of us who are actually just normal, functioning fucking adults who can have a conversation and do business and laugh and whatever, right? Is that one thing that concerns me about the left? My blog piece that I wrote on the weekend was sort of expressing that frustration as well. which was that, and also just not listening to opponents. But one thing that you're going to see if you block everybody, right, is that the right now, when you say the right, I'm talking to woke people who consider everyone who's not in this intersectionality cult as right, which is nonsense, right? I'm a fucking Marxist, whatever. People who you perceive to be right wing, right, which is basically people who who won't admit they're white supremacists because you demand that they are, which is bullshit. They're winning the argument, okay? Because this movement, like critical theory particularly, is very much anti-argument and very much based in emotion. I used to be like this when I was a feminist, younger. I would get upset because they were disagreeing with me, and I would not argue it from a place of logic, okay? I would not reason. What I would do is I would get upset and use emotional tactics and emotional blackmail. And the problem, when you use emotional arguments and emotional blackmail in order to win an argument, you don't win the argument with anyone that you're trying to change their mind. All you do is make people think that they feel abused, right? So what I want to do, my big mission is to stay on the left and actually not fucking look reasonable again. Make us look reasonable again, for fuck's sake. But also I can argue, right? And when I say argue, I don't mean argue as in emotionally and abuse and say, oh, that feels a bit dodgy, that's racist, blah, blah. I'm saying, no, I can argue. I could argue Jordan Peterson's assessment about the gender pay gap, for example, because he actually mischaracterizes the data as much as feminists do. And I could actually sit down and go, well, actually, no, that wasn't what it was intended to be. And here's the history of, how that was, basically a bunch of fucking non-feminists and non-scholars went and just repeated something like it was true, which is that the gender pay gap is a gap, job for job gap. And nobody who's across feminism actually acknowledges that. I remember reading an old PhD, because that's what I do in my spare time. But it was basically, it's called sticky floor, right? So it's not so much, you've got the glass ceiling, right? Which is that thing, the idea that it's not so much that she said that there was no glass ceiling as such, but what there is a sticky floor. Now, the sticky floor is things like, children, having to work part-time, all those things that actually keep women from progressing in their career. That's an early version of the gender pay gap, and that's a real thing, right? And so, the fact that women have to do more domestic labour and a lot more emotional labour, that's a thing, right? But I think if I can talk to anybody on the right about, if I can appeal to your sensibilities, which is there are still people on the left who agree with what agree with your criticisms. The problem is that there's been a game of, I was going to say Chinese whispers, telephone, about what the feminist argument is. Okay, so I would hope that some guys, would not run with, go to the source material or talk to the source, right? And a lot of this third wave feminist stuff, especially this internet feminism stuff, it's nonsense, and I distance myself from it, and it's actually not what the theory was. Okay, like intersectionality, right? This new intersection, it's just a cult that's formed on top of these ideas. It's not the actual ideas. So that's my plea. That's your homework, is to try and see that there are some reasonable people, and I want to have a conversation. But the new podcast, I'm hoping to get up. Start this week. I just need my first guest. Okay. Taya, it is strange that the British women attack the lies here more than the men. Well, that's because that's come out of a result of the gender debate. So what the actual split? I'll keep going. I have to go and pick up my son in 10 minutes, but I'll keep going. So what the split here is, for those that don't know this stuff, see, we also assume that everyone knows what we know, and I'm happy to answer these things. So where the reason why you're seeing that happen is that there is actually a split that has occurred in feminism, right, between the old... You'd actually find that most second wave feminists, right, aside from, your sort of full-on separatist, scum manifesto type women, right? Most second wave feminists agree with a lot of the arguments that MRAs have, believe it or not. Okay, they might, again, it's funny how the way that something is wrapped up, right? That's why you've got to get to the core idea and the core principle underneath what appears on the surface, because you'll actually find that modern feminists and modern MRAs, they actually agree with each other on a lot of the problems when you scratch the surface, when you actually get back down. But what happened was, so the history of feminism was that second wave feminism was very much around women's economic autonomy, emancipation from men, freedom from violence, okay, from men, and a breaking of gender norms and gender roles. So you are a woman, therefore you are at home, you do this is your role, right? Now the new feminists, the third wave feminists, started saying, well, I want to choose, right? It started with the right to choose, and then intersectionality, right? Now, so basically the second wave movement in the 60s, right, happened alongside the civil rights movement. And so Kimberly Crenshaw, she rightly criticised the feminist movement in the 80s for not factoring in other axes of oppression, such as being a black woman, right? So if you're a black woman, it's harder, you're suffering you're getting a twofer in your oppression over sort of middle-class white women. That's where intersectionality started, right? Valid criticism, okay? It wasn't permission to hijack every fucking conversation and dominate. And that's been the problem, okay? And then what happened? I've seen this. I witnessed this happen online. I witnessed this morphing happen on Jezebel. If you go back, it's really funny because just see that concept creep. Then it became, we must centre black women in every conversation. I would argue that as a policy person, consultation with everybody and being open to different perspectives is true, but centering became the thing, right? Again, it just became a matter of language. Then what happened was gender happened, okay? This idea that there are multiple genders, and that came out of postmodern schools and all this sort of stuff. And then it became basically just the oppression Olympics. So it became, and I remember, because as someone who's on the chunky side, I've read all this fat acceptance stuff, right? I've had an eating disorder for most of my life. And so I understand that psychology, which was around, don't stop the dietary pharmaceutical complex that exists around women's bodies. Fat is a feminist issue by Marilyn Wan, right? A book that she wrote, I think it was in the 90s. Again, valid point, right? The fact that women's bodies are heavily scrutinised and it fucks with our heads. Then in the early 2000s, I think it was the Spice Girls was the turning point. The Spice Girls, where it became trendy and popular, and sexualization and exploitation became empowerment. And that was where the split exists between feminists, right? So that's really where the split is. So a lot of sort of people who are traditionally feminists like me, which it's like, well, if you've watched my previous streams about women in tech, I say, yeah, I fucking get mansplained all the fucking time, right? It's a problem, right? But it's also just working with engineers, because engineers are like that. They think everyone else is stupid. It's actually part of working with smart people. But as a gender, men do tend to talk down to me, but not always, right? So, and also mansplaining is just a funny word because it's true. It's unique. It's quite a unique thing. It's a unique emotion when you feel mansplained. We can tell the difference. Anyway, but so that's the split. So basically, women really just sort of entered the workforce. Now, what I actually think this wokeism is weird. Susan Faludi, Backlash. Read it. If not, just read the Wikipedia page, which wokeism actually fits all of those elements, which is that she predicted that there would be a backlash from women going into the workplace and all that sort of stuff, that we would eventually end up having to compete. She basically predicted that this would happen, that feminism would eat itself, and that this would benefit those that don't want women out of the house, basically. And that's what I find interesting, is in light of the Karen meme and all those sorts of things, which is how opposed, like, a lot of these young girls who hate their mothers. And it's like a lot of this stuff comes from resentment that mum didn't spend time with them or didn't work. And they're kind of parroting a lot of the stuff that mum failed at, right? It's like, no, your mum was a feminist, sweetheart. But anyway, that's a side point. I need to get to know shorter men. I know some short men. I usually crush them. But anyway. Sorry. Creative group. I want to make sure that very valid point is mentioned, which is that it's not black women doing it. I was actually that's actually the point, right? This has been co-opted by those in power. I've said this before, right? That wokeism is distinct from the social movements that it claims to represent. This is wealth, and it's just a reconsolidation of the same power, but it's just in a different outfit, right? It's misogyny in a dress, and fucking, racism wrapped up as anti-racism, and fascism wrapped up as anti-fascism in the form of a cult, a form of a political cult. It's just, if you have grown up disadvantaged in any way, like I have, right, growing up working class, you see that they ignore class completely. Like an upper class woman who's a lawyer, who just happens to be brown, whose parents are doctors, who's never wanted for anything, somehow is elevated to more oppressed than me, right? Where literally my only privilege that I've ever had in life is that I'm white. I've got everything else, every other fucking, it's just like, well, hang on, how did that happen, right? So, so basically, Creative Group said the identical issue with the LGBTQ community. So this is what I've observed through the trans debate and where this nexus of this community. So these are collisions. So this is what we're seeing. I'm talking about a woke cult, but what we're seeing is this. You'll see where these things collide, which is where the debates are happening. The conflict arises when the cult clashes with the legitimate activists who know what's up. So the fucking lesbians, man, they know what's up. The lesbian feminists know what's up with the T, right? And the LGBT versus the Q2, the alphabet people, different things, right? I don't talk on those issues because I'm not a member of the community, but I've attached to that. I'm what used to be considered an ally, but now apparently I'm not. But same thing with white women, rich white women. I've said this before, right? Diversity and inclusion, right? It's run by white women to get white women's positions, rich white women. So they've replaced mediocre rich white men with mediocre rich white women. It's not actual diversity. So, Anyway, this I've got to go. This has been too long. I'm really happy that people have been chatting today. That's great. So wealth knows no side but control, absolutely. But that's why I think that we need to cut Trump a little slack on this thing, because Twitter are running things for the Ministry of Truth, right? If you're an Orwell fan, you'll know what that means. They've appointed themselves as the Ministry of Truth, okay? And we all know that that is not the case, okay? They do suppress dissenting views, as long as they suppress dissenting views, I will absolutely fight their ability to fact check anything, okay? Because they're not facts. I've seen people who are on the receiving end of CNN and New York Times and just the outright false. The fact that they won't address some of these issues, until they start addressing these issues, they have no credibility in my eyes. And I would rather it be left to be free and bad ideas. If Trump has a bad idea, that people can reply to him and say that's a bad idea, and that I have the ability to set up a YouTube channel and say this is why I think it's a bad idea, and then they can come on and they can tell me why I'm wrong, and we might actually get some understanding. That's really, that's what politics. Well, it's what politics. We're actually fighting for politics. That's what politics is. It's discourse and discussion and debate. That's the backward thing about this whole woke movement, is that at some point politics became all about power rather than consensus and negotiation and living together. And that worries me, because when you see everything through the lens of power, you see what we have, you see more of our differences than you do our similarities. And most of us, we're more similar. Right? Most of us, if you sit down, we love our kids, we try our best, we work hard, right? Rich, poor, black, all those things, right? I think most people are decent, even if you're in, and honestly, I think that this is a cult and they're cult members, and I call them cult members. When you look at it through that lens, I feel sadness that they're victims of a cult, and all we can do is just keep pushing that dissonance and hope that they come to their senses. Anyway, there's a lot to unpick there. This started with Trump, but it's not just about that. It's not just a Twitter tantrum. This is something that I think this is at the frontier of everything to do with the internet. I will get some experts on to talk about this, and both sides of politics. Hopefully, I really hope. Seriously, I'm really hurting for Australian left-wing guests. I will have anybody on who is Australian and left-wing because who wants to talk about their experiences with the internet, because I'm finding it very difficult, because the guests that I do line up are all either suppressive persons or on the right, or foreign or American. So I'd really like to get some local content, because I'm sure that my American audience would really like to hear some Australians' thoughts on these things as well. Because what I see from the outside of America, I have something to offer, right? Which is that you're all fucking nuts, and we love you for it. You're mental. You're absolutely mental, but that's, you guys are like the crazy uncle of the world. It's great. So Sec 1971 said something awesome and non-inflammatory at all. Good luck. Thank you. I like it's not an accent. You have an accent. So yeah, and Australia, and I think that one thing that Trump has done is managed to distract everyone from some of these. We have a very strong right-wing movement, and they're a lot more dangerous, I think, than anything that Trump would say. He's just full of shit. He just talks shit. If you've ever had that person in your family, maybe it's just a matter of being exposed to people, like a broader range of people. If you've grown up in polite society and you're rich and you conduct yourself in a certain way, I can see why someone like Trump would confront you and you'd think that was dangerous. Whereas I've grown up with people who are lovable but just talk shit. And they're just fucking narcissists, but you love them anyway, right? And I think that I would never say that I love Trump, because I think he's a despicable person, but he's entertaining. One book, actually, do you know one book that started to sort of make me see Trump in a different light was Win Bigly by Scott Adams. Because I think it's because I study persuasion and I've worked in persuasion, and he'd never really framed it in that thought before, which is he's just persuasive, right? He talks shit, but he's not talking shit, and he's just very, very, very good persuader. So I just hope that we can get back. I really hope that, I desperately hope that with this Twitter thing, either Twitter and Facebook and Google are a platform and they're hands off, and we can actually just be free. Right? We can actually say what we want, and they can't exercise editorial control outside of the most illegal stuff, right? Of course, the most heinous and violent stuff, right? None of this wrong think bullshit, right? Dangerous ideas aren't actually dangerous, right? They're just ideas. Or they say that they're they admit that they are publishers. They have to declare where their biases are. It is made clear where their biases are, and the market opens up for other places like Gab or BitChute or those sorts of places. That's what I'm hoping. right? Why Trump continues to engage on Twitter and not move to Gab remains to be seen, right? But I don't understand that, because people would just flock to Gab, but I don't know. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'm amazed that so many people were chatting today. That's great. I've got a Patreon if you want to join that. Go to my website to see all that stuff. I hate asking for money during a pandemic and stuff, but you know what to do if you think I'm awesome. Got the book coming, podcast coming, all that sort of stuff. I have to go and do mummy things. Speaking of domestic labour, and I will talk to you next week. Thanks for your precious life seconds, and thanks for watching. I did that in the wrong order. I have to do it in the right order. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your precious life seconds. Bye.